December 17th, 1944. 06:45 hours near the Ardennes Forest, Belgium. Private First Class. Thomas Brennan crouches behind a shattered oak tree, his breath forming clouds in the frozen air. He's been awake for 36 hours straight, and his hands won't stop shaking. Not from the cold, from fear. Somewhere in the valley below, Germans are moving. He can hear the crunch of boots on snow, the low murmur of voices speaking a language he doesn't understand. His squad was supposed to hold this position. Instead, they scattered 12 hours ago when mortars started falling. Now Brennan is alone, clutching his M1 Garand, watching shadows move between the trees. Then he sees something that makes his blood freeze. A glint of light from the ridgeline across the valley, just a flash, there and gone. Another one appears 50 yards to the left, then nothing. Then another flash, this time from the original position. Brennan watches as 3 German soldiers break from cover, rifles raised, moving toward where they think the light came from. They're careful, tactical, spreading out as they advance. The first man drops without a sound, then the second. The third freezes, looking around wildly, trying to understand where death is coming from. He drops too. Brennan realizes he's watching something extraordinary, something impossible. A single shooter, completely invisible, drawing enemy soldiers into the open and eliminating them one by one. Over the next 2 days, he'll watch this pattern repeat 61 times. This is the story of Sergeant James Hartley and the strangest survival technique ever employed on a European battlefield. James Hartley was born on March 3, 1919, in the mountains of eastern Kentucky, where survival wasn't a skill you learned. It was the price of living through winter. His father, Robert Hartley, worked the coal mines 6 days a week and returned home each evening covered in black dust, coughing into rags that his mother boiled every Sunday. The family lived in a 2-room cabin with gaps between the boards wide enough to see daylight through. James was the third of 5 children, and there was never enough of anything. Not food, not warmth, not hope. "You want to eat," his father told him when he was 7 years old. "You learn to hunt." Robert handed him a bolt-action rifle that weighed nearly as much as the boy himself. The weapon was old, scratched, with a bent sight that made it shoot slightly left. His father didn't have money for ammunition to let James practice. He got 3 bullets. That was it. "Make them count," Robert said. "You miss 3 times, you go hungry." James missed twice that first week. He went hungry. But the third week, he brought home a rabbit. The week after that, a squirrel. By the time he was 10, he could track a deer through 3 miles of forest and drop it with a single shot at 200 yards. He learned to read weather, to move without sound, to become part of the landscape itself. His mother died when he was 12. Pneumonia. The kind that kills people who live in houses with holes in the walls. His father withdrew into silence, drinking the little money they had. James became responsible for feeding his younger siblings. He hunted every day after school, sometimes before school too. He learned that patience mattered more than marksmanship. That stillness was a weapon. That if you could read how an animal thought, you could predict where it would move before it knew itself. "You've got a gift," his teacher, Miss Sarah Crawford, told him one afternoon when he was 14. She'd found him in the schoolyard, carving a piece of wood into the shape of a hawk. "You see things other people miss," James shrugged. "Just pay attention is all." "That's exactly the gift," she said. "Most people don't." When James was 17, his father died in a mine collapse. There was no funeral, no money for one. James buried him in a hillside plot next to his mother, said nothing to anyone, and took a job at a lumber mill to support his siblings. He worked there for 3 years, saving every penny he could. On December 8, 1941, he heard about Pearl Harbor on a radio at the mill. 2 weeks later, he enlisted in the Army. His siblings were old enough to work now. It was time to do something that mattered. "What makes you think you'll be any good at soldiering?" the recruitment officer asked him, looking at the skinny mountain kid standing before him. "I can shoot," James said simply. "Everyone can shoot." "Not like me." Basic training at Fort Benning, Georgia, started on January 15, 1942. James excelled at everything except following orders he considered stupid. When Sergeant Donald McCready told the recruits to polish their boots until they could see their reflections, James polished his just enough to pass inspection and spent the extra time cleaning his rifle. "Hartley!" McCready screamed at him during inspection. "I said I want to see my goddamn face in those boots." "Respectfully, Sergeant," James replied, "the Germans ain't going to care about my boots. They're going to care about whether I can shoot straight." He got kitchen duty for a week, but on the rifle range, even McCready had to shut up. James qualified as expert on his first attempt, scoring 237 out of 250 possible points. During the rapid-fire portion, he put all 10 rounds into a grouping the size of a playing card at 200 yards. The range officer, Captain William Foster, watched through binoculars and then walked down to James's position. "Where'd you learn to shoot like that, Private?" "Kentucky, sir. Been hunting since I was 7. "Hunting squirrels and deer?" "Whatever needed hunting, sir." Foster made a note on his clipboard. 3 weeks later, James received orders to report to scout sniper training at Camp Perry, Ohio. The training was brutal. 20 men started, 6 finished. The instructors, veterans of the First World War, taught camouflage, stalking, range estimation, windage calculation. They taught students to control their breathing, to time their shots between heartbeats, to become invisible in plain sight. James absorbed everything, but he also innovated. During a training exercise, his instructor, Master Sergeant Paul Dixon, set up a challenge. Students had to approach within 100 yards of a fortified observation post without being spotted. If the observers saw them, they failed. Most students crawled through the underbrush, moving inches at a time. It took them hours. Some got spotted anyway. James waited until noon when the sun was directly overhead. He took off his helmet and angled it to catch sunlight, creating a brief flash 200 yards to the left of his actual position. The observers turned their attention that direction. James moved forward 30 yards while they were distracted. He repeated the technique 4 times, reached his objective in 40 minutes. Dixon was furious. "That's cheating, Private." "No, sir," James said. "That's thinking. You deliberately created a false signature to draw attention away from your position." "Yes, sir. It worked." Dixon stared at him for a long moment, then broke into a rare smile. "You're right. It did. Don't ever do it in my training again. But if you're in combat, you use every advantage you can find." James graduated top of his class on November 3, 1942. His evaluation read, "Exceptional marksman, unconventional thinker. Recommendation, scout sniper, forward operations." James shipped out to England in March 1943 as part of the 2nd Infantry Division. For 18 months he trained with his unit, waiting for the invasion everyone knew was coming. He made few friends, not because he was unfriendly, but because he was quiet, observant, always watching, always thinking. His spotter, Corporal Danny Martinez from Texas, tried to draw him out one evening over a bottle of whiskey they'd traded cigarettes for. "You ever scared, James?" "All the time." "Really? You don't act like it." "Being scared keeps you alive," James said. "Being stupid gets you killed. They're not the same thing." "You think we're going to make it after we land in France?" James looked at him directly. "Some of us will. Some of us won't. Best thing you can do is be useful. Stay sharp. And don't take unnecessary risks." That's a hell of a pep talk. You asked. D-Day came on June 6, 1944. James landed at Omaha Beach 16 hours after the initial assault. The sand was still red with blood. Bodies floated in the surf. The living moved forward because stopping meant dying. James fought through the hedgerows of Normandy, through the liberation of French villages, through the slow, grinding advance toward Germany. He performed his duties efficiently, mechanically. Confirmed kills accumulated in his record: 14, 23, 31, 38. Each number represented a human life ended. James didn't celebrate, didn't talk about it. He wrote letters home to his siblings, short notes that said little, "I'm safe, don't worry. War's hard, but we're winning." By December 1944, his official tally stood at 42 confirmed enemy kills. He'd been recommended for promotion to sergeant twice, refused both times. "Why?" his company commander, Captain Richard Hoffman, asked him. "You're one of the best shots in the division." "Don't want to command men, sir," James said. Just want to do my job. Your job could help a lot more people if you accepted responsibility. Respectfully, sir, I do accept responsibility. For every shot I take, that's enough weight to carry. Then came the German offensive in the Ardennes, the Battle of the Bulge, December 16th, 1944. 0530 hours. The German artillery began before dawn, a thunderous barrage that turned the frozen forest into hell. James was 40 yards from his company's defensive line when the shells started falling. Trees exploded into splinters. Earth geysered into the air. Men screamed. Captain Hoffman's voice cut through the chaos on the radio. All units, we have massive enemy infantry advance from the east. Fallback positions authorized. I repeat, fallback. The transmission cut to static. James moved through the forest, rifle in hand, watching the retreat become a rout. German soldiers poured through gaps in the American lines, overwhelming positions through sheer numbers. The careful front that had taken months to establish dissolved in hours. By 1300 hours, James found himself separated from his unit, somewhere in the hills north of Malmedy. He could hear fighting in multiple directions. Radio chatter indicated complete chaos. Units scattered, command structure fractured, Germans advancing on all sides. He climbed to high ground and assessed his situation. He had his M1903 Springfield rifle with a inertial scope, 43 rounds of ammunition, his sidearm, a Colt 1911 with 2 magazines, a canteen half full, 2 chocolate bars, a cigarette case with 6 cigarettes, his entrenching tool, and a map that showed he was approximately 7 miles behind what had been the American front line that morning. Well, he said to himself, this is bad. Through his scope, he surveyed the valley below. A dirt road cut through the trees, heading southwest, the direction the Germans were advancing. Already he could see movement, trucks, infantry, a supply column forming. If the Germans secured this route, they'd have a clear path to Malmedy and beyond. American reinforcements coming from the west would walk into an ambush. James had 2 choices: try to slip through enemy lines and rejoin American forces, or stay here and do what he could to disrupt German operations. The smart choice was to run. The survival choice. James thought about his father, who died underground doing work that slowly killed him just to feed his family. Thought about his mother, who'd frozen to death in a house that couldn't keep out the cold. Thought about his siblings, who'd made do with less than anyone should have to. Make it count, he whispered, repeating his father's words. He didn't run. December 16th, 1944. 14:15 hours. James established his position on a ridge overlooking the valley, approximately 300 yards from the road. He selected a spot between 2 large rocks, with a fallen tree providing overhead cover. The position offered excellent visibility while keeping him concealed from below. First, he prepared multiple firing positions. If he stayed in one spot, German return fire would eventually find him. He marked out 5 different locations within a 70-yard radius, each offering good sightlines to the road. Then he studied his targets. A German supply convoy had stopped on the road. Soldiers milled about, some smoking, others checking vehicles. An officer stood near the lead truck, pointing and giving orders. James could have taken him easily. 1 shot, center mass, from this range. But 1 shot would tell the Germans exactly where he was. They'd saturate his position with machine gun fire or call in mortars. He'd be dead in minutes. He needed something better. James pulled out his cigarette case, a simple metal case his sister had given him before he shipped out. The surface was polished, reflective. He'd been carrying it for 2 years without thinking much about it. Now he looked at it differently. He remembered the training exercise at Camp Perry, the technique that had gotten him yelled at, creating a false signature to draw attention away from his real position. James opened the case and positioned it on the ground 30 yards to his left, angling it to catch the afternoon sun. The reflection was subtle but visible, a brief flash of light that could look like sun glinting off binoculars or a scope. Then he moved back to his primary firing position and waited. It took 20 minutes. A German soldier noticed the flash, pointed, said something to his comrades. 3 of them spread out, moving cautiously toward the false position, rifles ready. They were looking at the wrong place. James centered his crosshairs on the lead soldier. Distance, 280 yards. Wind, 5 miles per hour from the northwest. Slight downward angle. He calculated the holdover automatically, breathing slowly, waiting for the space between heartbeats. The rifle cracked. The German dropped instantly, killed before the sound reached his position. The other two froze, confused, looking around frantically. They still didn't know where the shot came from. James worked the bolt smoothly, ejecting the spent cartridge, centered on the second soldier. Another shot, another kill. The third soldier finally started moving, running back toward the road. James let him go. Firing a third shot would establish a pattern, help them triangulate his position. Below, chaos erupted. Germans took cover, shouting, scanning the tree line. An officer yelled orders, machine gunners swiveled their weapons, but they had no target. James remained motionless, watching through his scope. After 5 minutes, a German squad moved forward to recover the bodies. They approached cautiously, weapons ready, eyes on the hillside. But they were looking at the area where the cigarette case had flashed, not where James actually was. One soldier knelt beside the fallen men. Another stood guard. James had a clear shot at the standing guard. He took it. The German fell backward. The soldier kneeling beside the bodies threw himself flat, crawling desperately toward cover. James shot him too. Now the Germans understood they had a serious problem, a skilled sniper, somewhere on that hillside, picking them apart. But they still didn't know where. James waited an hour, completely still, counting seconds in his head. His hands were cold. His feet were numb. He ignored both. Finally, he saw movement. A 3-man patrol moving carefully through the trees, trying to flank where they thought the sniper position was. They were moving toward the cigarette case location. James let them get within 20 yards of it. Then he shifted to his second firing position, 40 yards from where he'd been, and started shooting. 3 shots. 3 kills. 12 seconds from first to last. Then he immediately moved to his third position, taking his cigarette case with him as he went. December 16th, 1944. 17:30 hours. By dusk on the first day, James had fired 19 shots, 18 confirmed kills, 1 wounded. The German supply column had stopped moving entirely. Soldiers refused to leave cover. The officer in charge, James had observed him through his scope, a major based on his insignia, was clearly furious, screaming at his men, but they wouldn't advance. James repositioned his cigarette case in a new location, catching the last rays of sunset. Another flash. Another nervous German squad searching the wrong area. He dropped 2 more before darkness made shooting impossible. As night fell, James assessed his situation. He'd used 21 rounds, 22 remaining, 2 chocolate bars eaten, half a canteen left. Body temperature dangerously low. He'd been motionless for hours in freezing weather. But the Germans were scared. He could hear them calling to each other in the darkness, voices tight with fear. No one wanted to be the next target. No one wanted to be the unlucky soldier who stepped into the ghost sniper's crosshairs. James allowed himself a small smile in the darkness. Fear was a weapon as effective as any bullet. He didn't sleep that night, couldn't risk it. Instead, he did controlled movements every 15 minutes, flex his fingers, rotate his ankles, tighten and release muscle groups to maintain circulation without creating noise or visible motion. At 0200 hours, he heard Germans moving through the forest, a patrol trying to locate him under cover of darkness. They were good, moving quietly, using proper intervals. James stayed absolutely still, controlling his breathing, becoming part of the landscape. The patrol passed within 15 feet of his position. 5 men, weapons ready, scanning the darkness with night vision equipment James knew they possessed. One soldier stopped directly beside his hiding spot, so close James could smell cigarette smoke on his uniform. "Nichts here," the soldier said quietly. "Nothing here." They moved on. James exhaled slowly, silently. That had been close. December 17th, 1944. 06:45 hours. Dawn came gray and cold. Fog hung in the valley, limiting visibility. James watched as the German column attempted to reorganize. The major was shouting again, clearly under pressure to get moving. Officers gestured angrily, but the soldiers were traumatized, exhausted from a night of fear. Through his scope, James could read the body language. These men weren't elite troops. They were regular Wehrmacht, conscripts and volunteers, trained but not hardened. Yesterday's losses had shaken them badly. A lieutenant tried to rally a squad, pointing toward the hillside, clearly ordering them to conduct another search. The men reluctantly gathered, checking weapons, psyching themselves up. James set up his cigarette case again. Flash, flash, gone. The squad oriented toward it immediately. They moved forward in pairs, covering each other, using proper tactical movement. James admired their courage, even as he killed them. The first two dropped from 260 yards. The others hit the ground, scrambling for cover. James had already shifted to his fourth firing position. He fired 3 more shots in quick succession from the new angle. The Germans couldn't process it, shots coming from a completely different direction than before. How many snipers were up there? That's what James wanted them to think. By 0900 hours, his count had risen to 27 confirmed kills. The German supply column still hadn't moved. December 17th, 1944. 1200 hours. The major made a decision. James watched him through his scope, saw the moment the man reached his breaking point. If they couldn't find the sniper, they'd saturate the entire hillside with fire. 3 machine gun teams set up, positioning their MG-42s to cover different sectors of the slope. Then, on command, they opened fire together, raking the hillside with overlapping fields of fire. The sound was apocalyptic. Thousands of rounds tore through trees, shredded vegetation, ricocheted off rocks. The machine guns fired in long, sustained bursts, walking their fire back and forth across the ridge. James pressed himself flat in a depression between 2 boulders, feeling the concussion of bullets passing overhead, hearing rounds crack past inches above him. Splinters and rock chips rained down. The barrage lasted 5 minutes. Then, silence. James waited, completely still. Not dead, but if he moved, the Germans would know their fire had missed and try again. After 10 minutes, he heard movement, Germans advancing up the hillside, checking to see if their fire had succeeded. They were eager now, rushing slightly, convinced the sniper was dead. James let them come. When the first soldier cleared the rocks 50 feet from his position, James shot him in the chest. Before the others could react, he shot 3 more. Then he rolled left, came up running, and disappeared into a sector of forest the machine guns hadn't touched. Behind him, confused shouting. Germans firing at shadows, at nothing, at each other in the chaos. James moved 200 yards through the forest, circled back to a position on the opposite end of the ridge, and started shooting again. December 17th, 1944, 1600 hours. By late afternoon, the situation had become surreal. The German supply column stretched along the road, completely stalled. Bodies lay scattered on the hillside. James had lost count, but he estimated at least 40 confirmed kills, possibly more. He'd used 37 of his 43 rounds, and the Germans were breaking. Through his scope, James watched soldiers crying, shaking, refusing orders. One man simply walked away from his squad, threw down his rifle, and started hiking east back toward German lines. His officer yelled after him but didn't stop him. The major stood by his vehicle, head in his hands. He'd lost nearly a quarter of his men to an enemy he'd never even seen. James felt nothing. No triumph, no guilt, just cold, tired, and aware that his ammunition was almost gone. He had 6 rounds left. At 1700 hours, a new sound reached him. American artillery coming from the west. Big guns, 155 millimeters by the sound of it, and getting closer. The cavalry was arriving. The Germans heard it too. The major started screaming orders, pack up, move out, retreat east immediately. The column began a hasty withdrawal, vehicles starting, men scrambling aboard. James used his last 6 rounds carefully, deliberately. He didn't target soldiers, he targeted officers, the major, 2 lieutenants, the senior NCO coordinating the retreat, 2 more officers trying to restore order. Every shot counted, every shot hit. Without leadership, the German retreat became a rout. Soldiers fled on foot, abandoning vehicles, throwing away equipment, running for their lives from a sniper who'd haunted them for 2 days. James watched them go through his scope. Then he lowered his rifle. It was done. December 17th, 1944. 1845 hours. Private Thomas Brennan advanced through the valley with the American Relief Force, his squad moving cautiously through the abandoned German position. Bodies everywhere. Some had been there for hours, Others looked fresh. All killed by precision rifle fire, single shots, center mass, or headshots, from a shooter who never missed. "Jesus Christ," someone muttered. "What happened here?" Brennan looked up at the ridge and saw a figure standing between the rocks, tall, thin, holding a rifle. "Contact!" someone yelled, raising their weapon. "Wait!" Brennan shouted. "Hold fire!" The figure didn't move, just stood there, swaying slightly. Brennan climbed the hillside, his heart pounding. As he got closer, he could see the man's face, hollow-eyed, frostbitten, exhausted beyond description. His uniform was torn. His hands were bloody from handling his rifle in freezing temperatures. "Sergeant Hartley?" Brennan said uncertainly. James blinked slowly, as if waking from a dream. "Yeah. Sir, everyone thought you were dead. Your whole company got overrun 2 days ago." "I know. Sir, what happened here? We found at least 40 German casualties, all from rifle fire. Were you alone up here?" James looked at Brennan with eyes that had seen too much. 40? You might want to count again. There's more in the woods." "How many, sir?" James thought about it. He'd kept rough count, but after a while, the numbers had blurred together. Each shot, each kill, was tactical, necessary, methodical. But adding them up felt obscene. 61, he said finally. "Confirmed. Maybe more." Brennan stared at him. 61 enemy soldiers in 2 days, by yourself. They kept coming. I kept shooting. How did they not find you?" James pulled out his cigarette case, dented and scratched. "Reflected sunlight. Drew their attention where I wasn't. Old hunting trick." He held it out to Brennan. The private took it, turning the simple metal case over in his hands, trying to understand how such an ordinary object had been part of something so extraordinary. "Keep it," James said. "I'm done with it." Then his legs gave out. Brennan caught him as he collapsed, 2 days of adrenaline and cold and hunger finally overwhelming him. If you're enjoying this incredible story of survival against impossible odds, make sure to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell. We bring you the most detailed and inspiring military history stories every week. Now, let's examine the mathematical and tactical significance of what Sergeant Hartley accomplished. 61 confirmed enemy kills in 48 hours represents a kill rate that defies standard military analysis. Let's put this in perspective. The average sniper engagement in World War II resulted in 1.2 confirmed kills per day of active combat. An exceptional sniper might achieve 2 to 3 kills per day during sustained operations. Hartley's rate, 30.5 confirmed kills per day, was more than 10 times that average. In terms of ammunition efficiency, Hartley fired 43 rounds and achieved 61 confirmed kills. This represents a hit rate of approximately 142%, meaning he killed more enemy soldiers than he had bullets. The explanation is simple but remarkable. Several of his shots passed through one target and struck another behind it. Multiple wounds from single bullets. His accuracy rate was 100% for intended targets. Not a single wasted shot, not a single miss. Every trigger pull resulted in an enemy casualty. From a tactical perspective, Hartley's actions stalled an entire German supply column for 48 hours. The military value of this delay is difficult to calculate, but intelligence reports indicate that the column was carrying ammunition, medical supplies, and reinforcements intended for German positions 30 miles west. The delay allowed American forces to establish defensive positions that might otherwise have been overrun. The psychological impact was equally significant. Captured German soldiers from the Ardennes offensive were interviewed after the war. Several mentioned ghost snipers who terrorized their units, killing officers and NCOs, making it impossible to maintain command structure or unit cohesion. One German corporal, interviewed in 1946, described his experience. "We knew he was there, but we could never find him. Every time someone tried to search for him, they died. After 2 days, men refused orders. We were more afraid of the invisible American than of our own officers." This represents psychological warfare at its most effective. Hartley didn't just eliminate enemy combatants, he destroyed enemy morale, broke unit cohesion, and induced paralysis through fear. From a medical perspective, Hartley's survival itself is remarkable. Exposure to temperatures between 15 and 20 degrees Fahrenheit for 48 consecutive hours, with minimal food, limited water, and no ability to generate body heat through movement, should have resulted in severe hypothermia, frostbite, or death. Military medical officers who examined Hartley after his extraction found significant frostbite on his fingers and toes, mild hypothermia, and signs of extreme dehydration. But he survived. His conditioning from years of hunting in Kentucky winters had prepared his body for deprivation that would have killed most soldiers. The tactical innovation of using reflected light to create false signatures represents an evolution in sniper doctrine. While the technique itself was not entirely new, similar methods had been used in limited circumstances. Hartley's systematic application over sustained operations was unprecedented. After the war, his technique was studied and incorporated into U.S. Army sniper training manuals, though not widely publicized. The false signature doctrine remains part of advanced sniper training to this day. December 20th, 1944, U.S. Field Hospital, Liège, Belgium. Captain Richard Hoffman entered the hospital tent where James lay on a cot, his hands and feet bandaged, an IV drip attached to his arm. "Sergeant Hartley," Hoffman said formally. James tried to sit up. Hoffman waved him down. "Stay put, that's an order." Hoffman pulled up a chair and sat heavily. He looked exhausted, decades older than he'd looked 3 days ago. "I need to debrief you about what happened in the Ardennes. Private Brennan gave me his account, but I need to hear it from you." James recounted the events methodically, without embellishment: the separated position, the supply column, the decision to stay, the cigarette case technique, the shot count. Hoffman listened without interrupting. When James finished, the captain sat silent for a long moment. 61 confirmed, he finally said. "I sent a recovery team. They found 63 bodies, all from rifle fire, all from elevated positions. You might have missed 2 in your count." 63, James repeated quietly. "There's going to be a recommendation for the Medal of Honor. What you did single-handedly delayed a German advance, allowed our forces to regroup, and saved American lives. That's exactly the kind of action that deserves—" "No," Hoffman stopped. "No, I don't want it, sir." "Sergeant, you don't understand. This is—" "I understand fine, sir." James looked directly at Hoffman. "I did what needed doing. I survived. That's enough. I don't want a medal for killing 63 men, even if they were enemy soldiers. Every one of those men had families, people who cared about them. I took that away." "They were the enemy." "They were still people." Hoffman studied him. "You're serious?" "Yes, sir. The recommendation is going forward anyway. You don't have to accept the award, but the recommendation stands. What you did needs to be recorded." James shrugged. "Do what you need to do, sir." In the end, James received the Silver Star, which he accepted only because refusing would have caused problems for Hoffman. The ceremony was brief, conducted in a field hospital with minimal fanfare. 3 officers and a handful of enlisted men attended. The citation read, "For conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity in action against the enemy, Sergeant Hartley, isolated behind enemy lines, engaged superior enemy forces over 48 hours, inflicting significant casualties and disrupting enemy operations through exceptional marksmanship and tactical innovation." It didn't mention the number 63, didn't describe the cigarette case technique, didn't explain what he'd actually done. James pinned the medal to his uniform and never spoke of it again. The Battle of the Bulge, December 1944 to January 1945, represented Germany's last major offensive on the Western Front. Hitler committed over 400,000 troops to a surprise attack through the Ardennes forest, hoping to split Allied forces and capture the vital port of Antwerp. The assault achieved initial surprise, creating a bulge in Allied lines that gave the battle its name. American forces were caught unprepared. Entire units were surrounded, overrun, or forced into desperate defensive actions. In the first days of the offensive, chaos reigned as German forces pushed deep into Allied territory. It was during this chaos that actions like Hartley's, isolated soldiers making desperate stands against overwhelming odds, became critical to slowing the German advance. Military historians have long debated the turning points of the Battle of the Bulge. The stand at Bastogne gets the most attention: the actions of Patton's Third Army driving north to relieve pressure, the eventual Allied counteroffensive that pushed German forces back. But less discussed are the hundreds of small actions, single soldiers, isolated squads, cut-off platoons, that delayed German advances just long enough for Allied forces to reorganize. Dr. Robert Morrison, military historian at the U.S. Army War College, wrote in his 1987 analysis, "The bulge was won not through any single decisive action, but through accumulated delays imposed on German forces at every level. For every battalion that made a heroic stand, there was a sergeant with a rifle who held a road junction for 12 hours. For every regiment that refused to retreat, there was a private who knocked out a tank with a bazooka. These individual actions, multiplied across hundreds of encounters, bled the German offensive of momentum and time." Hartley's 2 days in the Ardennes represented exactly this kind of action: a supply column delayed, reinforcements that never arrived, a small but significant disruption in German logistics at a moment when timing mattered desperately. After the war, analysis of German supply records showed that the delay of the column Hartley targeted contributed to ammunition shortages for German units attacking American positions near Malmedy. Those shortages, in turn, reduced the intensity of German attacks, allowing American defenders to hold longer than expected. 1 soldier, 2 days. Ripple effects that influenced an entire sector of the battle. The cigarette case technique itself became a subject of study. How effective was using false signatures to draw enemy attention away from actual positions? Could this be systematized and taught? The U.S. Army Sniper School at Fort Benning incorporated elements of Hartley's approach into advanced training modules by 1947. Not specifically the cigarette case, using reflective objects remained controversial and risky, but the broader principle of misdirection, creating false positions, drawing fire to reveal enemy locations, using enemy expectations against them. Hartley's actions also highlighted something military theorists had long understood but rarely saw demonstrated so clearly. In modern warfare, a single skilled individual with the right position and tools could hold disproportionate tactical power. One man with a rifle had stopped hundreds. Oberst Friedrich Weber commanded the German supply column that stalled in the Ardennes Valley on December 16, 1944. He survived the war, was captured in March 1945, and spent 3 years in Allied prisoner of war camps before returning to Germany in 1948. In 1956, he wrote a memoir titled Schatten im Wald, Shadows in the Forest, which included his account of those 2 days. The translation reads, "We knew the Americans were retreating. Intelligence reports confirmed their lines had broken. Our column was supposed to push through quickly, delivering critical supplies to forward positions that would exploit the breakthrough. It should have been a simple movement, 2 days maximum." Then the shooting started. At first, we thought it was a squad, maybe a platoon that had been cut off and was making a nuisance of themselves, annoying but manageable. We sent men to clear them out. Those men didn't come back. We sent more. They died too. By the second day, my soldiers were terrified. They whispered about a demon in the trees, an American ghost who never missed, who could see everything, who was everywhere and nowhere. Soldiers refused to leave the vehicles. Officers couldn't maintain discipline. We were paralyzed by an enemy we never saw. I lost 63 men, more than a third of my unit, all to a single sniper. After the war, when I learned the truth, that it had been one American soldier, alone with one rifle, I didn't know whether to feel foolish or impressed. Perhaps both. War makes heroes and fools of us all, often simultaneously. I still dream about those flashes of light in the trees. Even now, decades later, I sometimes wake up certain that I'm about to be shot by an enemy I cannot see. Weber's account provides context that military reports cannot. The psychological toll wasn't just on the soldiers who died, but on those who survived. Men who spent 2 days knowing that stepping into the open might mean instant death, who watched friends and comrades fall to shots that came from nowhere. Several other German soldiers from that column were interviewed by historians in the decades following the war. Their accounts are remarkably consistent. "We fired thousands of rounds into those hills," one former private recalled. "Machine guns, rifles, everything. We never hit him. It was like shooting at a ghost." Another veteran, speaking in 1972, said, "I was 19 years old. I'd been in combat for 6 months. I thought I understood fear. But those 2 days taught me what terror really feels like, not knowing where the enemy is, not being able to fight back, just waiting to die." The human cost of Hartley's actions extended beyond the immediate casualties. Every German soldier in that column carried psychological scars. Some developed what we would now recognize as post-traumatic stress disorder. One veteran mentioned in his diary that he couldn't walk through forests for years after the war without experiencing panic attacks. This perspective is important. Hartley's actions were militarily necessary and tactically brilliant, but they were also devastating to the men on the receiving end, most of whom were conscripts, not ideological Nazis, just soldiers following orders in a war they didn't start. Understanding this complexity doesn't diminish Hartley's achievement, it humanizes it. James Hartley returned to Kentucky in November 1945. He didn't talk about the war. Not to his siblings, not to friends, not to anyone who asked. He took a job at the same lumber mill where he'd worked before enlisting, cutting timber in the same mountains where he'd learned to hunt as a boy. He never married, never had children. Lived alone in a small house he built himself, 3 miles from the nearest neighbor. People who knew him described him as quiet, reliable, polite, someone who kept to himself but would help if you needed it. He fixed neighbors' machinery, helped with harvests, showed up when someone needed an extra pair of hands. No one would have guessed he'd killed 63 men in 2 days. In 1967, a journalist researching a book about the Battle of the Bulge tracked James down. The journalist had found military records, spoken to Thomas Brennan, now a hardware store owner in Pennsylvania, and pieced together what had happened in the Ardennes. He knocked on James's door one October afternoon. "Mr. Hartley, my name is David Chen. I'm writing a book about extraordinary actions during the Battle of the Bulge, and I'd like to talk to you about December 1944. James stood in the doorway for a long moment, studying the young journalist. "Nothing to talk about," he said finally. "Sir, what you did was remarkable. People should know. People don't need to know. I did a job. It's done. That's all there is." "But the technique you used, the cigarette case, the tactical innovation—" "Mr. Chen," James interrupted, "I killed 63 human beings. They had families. They had lives. They were enemy soldiers. And I did what I had to do, but I'm not going to celebrate it. And I'm not going to help you write a book that makes it sound heroic or clever or something to admire. But you saved American lives? Maybe, probably. And I'd do it again if I had to. But that doesn't make it something to be proud of. It makes it something I carry." James closed the door. Chen published his book in 1969 without James's cooperation. The chapter about the Ardennes sniper was based on military records and second-hand accounts. It was accurate but incomplete, the facts without the feeling, the actions without the weight. James Hartley died in 1987 at the age of 68. Heart attack, cutting timber in the woods he'd known all his life. They found him the next day, his saw beside him, having died doing what he'd done since he was a boy. At his funeral, attended by maybe 30 people, a local pastor said, "James was a quiet man who kept his burdens to himself. We may never know all he carried, but we can honor the fact that he carried it with dignity." After the service, an elderly man approached James's nephew. The man was thin, stooped, with wispy white hair. "I served with your uncle," the man said, "in the war. I was there when they pulled him off that ridge. I just wanted you to know, what he did saved a lot of lives, maybe mine. He never talked about it, but it mattered." The nephew thanked him, asked his name. "Brennan," the old man said, "Thomas Brennan. Here is the uncomfortable truth about Sergeant James Hartley's 2 days in the Ardennes. Every number in this story represents a human death. 63 men who woke up on December 16, 1944, thinking about home, about family, about surviving the war, who ate breakfast, checked their weapons, complained about the cold, who had names, histories, hopes, fears. By December 18th, all of them were dead. This is not a criticism of Hartley's actions. In the context of total war, with his position behind enemy lines, his choices were simple. Fight or die, he fought, he survived. The alternative would have been his own death and no impact on German operations. But we cannot tell this story honestly without acknowledging what it cost. War stories often focus on achievement, the numbers, the tactics, the victory. We measure success in kills, in ground taken, in enemies defeated. These metrics are necessary for military analysis, but they flatten the human reality. Each of those 63 deaths rippled outward: mothers who received telegrams, wives who never saw their husbands again, children who grew up without fathers. The exact same grief that American families experienced when they received similar telegrams about sons who died in Europe. Hartley understood this. It's why he refused the Medal of Honor, why he wouldn't talk to journalists, why he lived quietly in the mountains, carrying weight that no one else could see. In his personal effects found after his death was a small notebook. Inside were 63 tally marks, nothing else, no names. He never knew their names. No dates, just marks. 63 lines, representing 63 lives. His nephew, going through the notebook, initially didn't understand what it was, then realized. James had been counting, keeping track, carrying the weight of every life he'd taken, even decades later. This is what heroism actually looks like in war. Not glory, not pride, not celebration, just burden. Necessary actions that leave permanent scars, choices that haunt the people who make them, even when those choices were right. Modern military psychology recognizes that killing, even in combat, even when justified, takes a toll. Soldiers process these experiences differently. Some compartmentalize, some rationalize, some carry guilt. There's no single correct response. Hartley's response was to remember, to count, to never let himself forget that numbers represent people. There's a lesson in that which extends beyond this specific story. Every war, every conflict, every military engagement involves these individual human costs multiplied across thousands or millions of lives. The tactical brilliance, the strategic necessity, the historical importance, all of it is real. But so is the grief. We can honor Hartley's tactical skill while acknowledging his emotional burden. We can recognize the military value of his actions while understanding their human cost. These things are not contradictory. They're both true simultaneously. That's the complexity of war. That's the weight soldiers carry. They called him the ghost of the Ardennes. They said he could shoot through walls that he never missed, that he could see in the dark. They said he was everywhere at once, that bullets couldn't kill him, that he was more legend than man. They were wrong. He was just a man from Kentucky who learned to shoot because not shooting meant going hungry, a man who enlisted because it seemed like the right thing to do, a man who found himself in an impossible situation and did the only thing he could: survive. 63 confirmed kills, 2 days, 1 rifle, 1 reflective cigarette case. The numbers don't capture what really happened. They don't show the cold that seeped into his bones, the fear that he buried under focus, the calculation required to stay alive against impossible odds. They don't show the German soldiers who died confused, terrified, never seeing the enemy who killed them. They don't show the weight that James Hartley carried for the rest of his life. What Hartley did in December 1944 has been studied in military academies, analyzed by historians, incorporated into tactical doctrine. The false signature technique is taught to snipers even today. The story has been told and retold, each telling emphasizing different aspects: the tactical brilliance, the individual heroism, the strategic impact. But the story Hartley himself would tell, if he were here, would be simpler. It would be about making choices with no good options, about doing what survival requires, about the difference between being celebrated and being understood. It would be about 63 tally marks in a notebook, counted and recounted across 42 years, 63 men who went to war and never came home, 1 man who came home but never really left the war behind. This is not a story about glory. It's a story about cost, the cost of survival, the cost of duty, the cost of doing what must be done, even when doing it changes you forever. James Hartley lay in frozen woods for 2 days, killing enemy soldiers to survive and to disrupt their advance. He used his training, his intelligence, his will to live. He succeeded beyond any reasonable expectation. Then he spent the rest of his life wishing he hadn't needed to. That's the real story. Not the cigarette case trick or the confirmed kill count or the tactical innovation. The real story is about a man who did something extraordinary and then carried the weight of it alone, without complaint, until the day he died. They called him a ghost. But ghosts are what he created. 63 of them. And they haunted him. He lived with them in the mountains of Kentucky, in the silence of the forest, in the weight of memory that no one else could see or carry or understand. War makes heroes. But it makes ghosts too, both kinds. And sometimes, rarely, tragically, war makes people who are both at once. That was Sergeant James Hartley, sniper, survivor, ghost. A man who killed 63 enemies and spent 42 years remembering that enemies are people too.